Subscribe to our channel and press the bell icon to never miss an update from RAU'S IAS. Do not forget to subscribe to our Telegram channel for all the updates and materials. Hello and welcome to the Sunday edition of Daily News Analysis. An edition where we integrate last week's Indian Express explained section along with the last Sunday's The Hindu newspaper. The articles which we are going to discuss today have been displayed on the screen. We are going to discuss these news articles not in any particular order. Let us now begin the discussion. So the first news which we have taken appeared in the Indian Express explained section, which was about All India Judicial Services, lower judiciary and centralized recruitment debate. The idea of centralized recruitment of judges has been debated in legal circles for decades and remains contentious. So the central government is preparing to give a fresh push to the establishment of All India Judicial Services on the line of other services like Indian Administrative Service and Indian Police Service. Now, if you look into the GS Paper 2 syllabus, it forms an important part of the main syllabus. And so it is very important for us to understand just not about All India Judicial Services, but also from where the idea came into effect, what is the need to create such a service, and finally what will be the issues and way forward. And so let us begin by first understanding what All India Judicial Services is all about. So it aims at creating a centralized cadre of district judges who will be recruited centrally through an All India examination and allocated to each state along the lines of All India services. So just like you have UPSC Civil Services examination to select district magistrate or district collector or superintendent of police, district forest official, because these three are All India services. Have you seen an All India exam for selecting judges in the district level? No, you haven't seen, because there is no such service which exists now. And so this is the move to create that. To create a centralized cadre of district judges who will be recruited centrally through an All India examination. It has been pitched as a solution to judicial vacancies, lack of representation for the marginalized, and the failure to attract the best talent. So when it comes to the conception of the idea, the credit goes to the Law Commission, and specifically to the 14th report of the Law Commission, which first introduced the idea of All India Judicial Services. Then First National Judicial Pay Commission or Jagannath Shetty Commission in 1996 also recommended a centralized examination and selection of district judges. But we know the exact constitutional provision, which is Article 312, which provides for creation of All India Services. It was 42nd Amendment Act of 1976, which provided for creation of All India Judicial Services. So the constitutional provision exists for creation of All India Judicial Services. But this provision of the Constitution has not been utilized so far. So if the central government wants to create such a service, the Constitution would actually enable that and not become a hindrance in the path of creation of AIJS. So as you must have seen in the earlier slide, that AIJS has been conceptualized in order to sort out a lot of problems plaguing the Indian judiciary, and specifically the lower Indian judiciary. And so when we talk about the need, the first need is arrived at because there is a massive level of vacancy at the lower level of the judiciary. Because creation of All India Judicial Services would help fill approximately 5,000 vacancies across the district and subordinate judiciary in India. Then if UPSC or any other centralized authority takes over the appointment, it is going to solve a lot of issues which are currently plaguing the appointments at the state level. Because the existing system we know works under the high courts or state public service commissions. And they are full of loopholes, delays and inefficiencies. If you interact with people preparing for PCS judiciary, they would tell you how delayed the results are. And sometimes the final results are declared null and void. And so, creation of All India Judicial Services is going to solve this problem as well. Then just like IAS, IPS and IFOS attracts the best talent in the country like you people, this would help incentivize better talent to join the district and subordinate judiciary through transparent and efficient method of recruitment. For motivated young men and women, job satisfaction and personal reputation are more important, and they are less likely to become corrupt. So the instances of corruption, especially at the lower level of the judiciary, can be expected to be solved up to a great extent because of All India Judicial Services. Then creation of All India Judicial Services is expected to bolster the idea of cooperative federalism. A unified judiciary with uniform laws and an All India judiciary helps to foster the same idea. And finally, it is also expected to enrich the quality of justice, because when the selection is centralized, the training will also be centralized. And just like IAS officers are trained at Labasna in Mussoorie, police officers are trained in Police Academy in Hyderabad, there would be a Judicial Academy, National Judicial Academy, where best of the best talent in the legal and judicial profession, not just from India, but across the world, would be invited to teach, and that would lift the level of the justice to a great extent. So having been discussed the need, also entails upon us the duty to discuss the issues as well. Of course, no idea can be without challenges. And so the first and foremost challenge related to All India Judicial Services is the fear of centralization and federalism theory. Creation of an All India Judicial Services will necessarily mean transferring the recruitment and appointment powers of district judges from the state government to a centralized system as exists for All India Services. And this has been specifically dealt with in Article 233. So that is going to be the problem number one. It's going to be difficult to bring all the states on board with respect to the All India Judicial Services. Then there's going to be a problem of language, because all the states have their own laws in their local languages, and there are so many languages in the 8th schedule. And so up to the Court of District and Sessions Judge, the proceedings are conducted and the judgments are written in the local language. The judges recruited through All India Judicial process, being not familiar with the language, customs of the state, and deciding cases may affect the legitimacy of the judicial system in the eyes of local population and reduce its credibility. And so this is a big problem. While if you compare the role of a judge as compared to the role of district magistrate, it's very different. A judge has to listen to both the parties, has to understand the documents, and has to interpret the laws, for which in-depth understanding of the local language in which the law is written is very, very important. Then comes a very, very important point, which is about independence of judiciary. Currently, the independence of district judges is guaranteed by the fact that the High Court play a very, very significant role in appointment, transfer, and removal of district judges. But with setting up of All India Judicial Services, this control would be impaired or weakened at least, and thereby independence of the judiciary would suffer further erosion. Then there are apprehensions which are being expressed with respect to the reservation and the way the examinations are going to be conducted. Many of the communities who currently benefit from the state quotas may oppose the creation of All India Judicial Services. This is because the communities recognized as OBC by the state may not belong to as OBC classified by the state government. But apart from this, a national exam risks shutting out those from less privileged backgrounds from being able to enter into judicial services. And finally, about local laws. It may end up not taking into account local laws, practices, and customs which vary widely across states, and hence increasing the cost of training for judges selected through this mechanism. So you can understand that there are very good supporting points in order to create All India Judicial Services. But there are equally compelling issues or challenges associated with the creation of All India Judicial Services. So what do we do as a policy maker? Do we reject the idea? No. What we do as a policy maker is to try and act on way forward so that as many number of challenges or issues can be addressed. And so in this regard, there is a need to ensure that service is insulated from the influence of both central as well as the state government, right from the process of appointment to the process of removal, right? And so 116th report of the Law Commission recommended that appointments, postings and promotions to All India Judicial Services be made by National Judicial Service Commission, consisting of retired and sitting judges of the Supreme Court. Then when we try to bring about All India Judicial Service kind of reform, We need to make sure that all the states are on board in order to implement this idea. And when we decide to implement it, we should make sure that the training of all those who are being selected suits the local demand as well. So this is it as far as All India Judicial Service is concerned. From the perspective of mains examination, this is a very important topic. And the dimensions which you need to understand is basically the constitutional provision in order to create All India Judicial Services, what is the need to create AIJS, and what are the challenges which will be faced once we decide to implement it. Let us now move on to the next discussion. So the next topic of discussion again comes from Indian Express, human papilloma virus. What a new study has found on human papilloma virus vaccine, which protects against cervical cancer. Essentially, the study shows that the HPV vaccination in combination with cervical cancer screening reduces the cancer to a point where almost no one develops it, which is very encouraging. But how is it relevant for UPSC Civil Services examination? And where does it fits into among all the three stages of the examination? And so to give you the context, let us now discuss this question which was asked in 2019. Which one of the following statement is not correct? So whenever you are reading any MCQ, try to read this statement very clearly. This is how UPSC plays around. But anyways, if you try to focus on the statements, you can find all are viral diseases: hepatitis B and HIV, hepatitis B, hepatitis C. And the statements are framed around these diseases. For example, the statement 1, hepatitis B virus is transmitted much like HIV, which is obviously correct. Hepatitis B, unlike C, does not have a vaccine, which is incorrect because hepatitis B vaccine is the mainstay of hepatitis B prevention. And so the right answer would be B because that is incorrect, whereas statement C and D both are correct. Yes, it is true, globally the number of people infected with hepatitis B and C viruses are several times more than those infected with HIV. But since HIV progresses into a very severe disease which is known as AIDS, whereas the impact of hepatitis B and C is not as devastating, we don't come to discuss these diseases so often. And statement D is also correct because some of those infected with hepatitis B and C viruses do not show the symptoms for many years, which is also true for HIV and most other viruses. But anyways, this discussion was to convey the idea how important it is to discuss very common and famous viral diseases, and human papilloma virus is one of them, which is a type of virus of which there are more than 100 types. According to the National Cancer Institute, more than 40 types of HPV are spread through direct sexual contact. Out of these 40, 2 cause genital warts, while about a dozen of HPV cause different types of cancer, including cervical cancer, anal cancer, and various other kinds of cancers. But what is interesting to note over here is the relation between a virus and a disease like cancer, which is traditionally considered to be a mutation in DNA, for which traditionally the causes have been considered as mutation in the genetic code, but it's not true. The infectious diseases like viruses can also cause mentioned over here. And so to give you the context, you would be astonished to learn that almost all cervical cancers are caused by HPV, and the vaccine protects against 2 of the cancer causing strains, which are HPV 16 and HPV 18. So if I go back to the question and if I replace hepatitis B and C with human papilloma virus, now you can understand how the statement would look like. Human papilloma virus is transmitted much like HIV, up to a large extent true. There is a vaccine against human papilloma virus, again true. Then let's now move ahead and look into other kinds of aspects. Once infected, most people do not develop any symptoms, thereby are not aware that they have the virus. In most cases, the body's immune system will be able to clear the virus out, which means it won't do any harm to the individual. Even so, the virus can sometimes take years before it causes any symptom. And so you can see that this particular statement, some of those infected with hepatitis B and C viruses do not show the symptom for many years, is also true, holds true for human papilloma virus as well. And so finally moving on to the vaccines. If we talk about vaccines, we have already learned that there are vaccines which are of different kinds, just like you have 4 to 5 different kinds of mechanisms on which vaccines are derived in case of COVID. Similarly, you have multiple types of vaccines. But overall, they give protection against 4 of the strains, 16, 18, 6 and 11 out of 100. These vaccines prevent cervical cancer in women and girls who have not yet been exposed to the virus. So in order to be effective, they have to be administered before your exposure to the virus. So ideally, the vaccine should be administered before the individual makes their first sexual contact. While for teenagers, the vaccine is administered in a 2-dose regimen. For those between the ages of 15 to 26, a 3-dose regimen is used in United States. So I guess you now have a clear-cut idea as to what HPV as a virus is, what damage it can cause to individuals, and yes, it has a vaccine which is quite effective. So the next article for discussion is reading India's announcement on climate targets. Prime Minister enhanced India's existing climate targets and announced a new one during his speech in Glasgow. None of these are beyond the country's reach, according to the Indian Express. Now, all of us understand from the perspective of environment, especially in the prelims, it's very important. And a 2016 question would give you a good insight into it. With reference to the agreement at UNFCCC meeting in Paris 2015, which of the following statement is correct? The agreement was signed by all the member countries of the UN and it will go into effect in 2017. The agreement aims to limit the greenhouse gas emissions so that the rise in average global temperature by the end of this century does not exceed 2 degrees Celsius or even 1.5 degrees Celsius above the pre-industrial levels. Statement 3. Developed countries acknowledge their historical responsibility in global warming and committed to donate $1,000 billion a year from 2020 to help developing countries to cope with climate change. Now, if you read all these 3 statements, I have deliberately not shown you the options because out of 1, 2 and 3, 3 is wrong on its face. And let's say if you do not recall whether 1 or 2 are correct or incorrect. And the options was 1 and 3 only, 2 only, 2 and 3 only, and 1, 2 and 3. And so you could have easily arrived at the right answer by eliminating 3 from the options, which leads us to the right answer B, 2 only. So the summits of UNFCCC, the Conference of Parties, are very, very important. And so it is important for us to understand what India has committed at Glasgow. So speaking in Glasgow, Prime Minister Narendra Modi shortened the timeline on the country's existing climate targets and announced a few new targets as well. Modi's announcements underline India's commitment to fight against climate change, and importantly, none of the targets are likely to be too difficult to achieve, and this is quite encouraging. And let us understand how. So, if we look at the overall promise which India has made, Narendra Modi has categorized it as Panchamrit or 5 nectar elements. India will reach its non-fossil energy capacity to 500 gigawatt by 2030. India has promised that it will meet 50% of its energy requirement from renewable energy by 2030. Let us know in the comment section what is the current percentage of renewable energy in overall sector. The promise number 3 is that India will reduce the total projected carbon emissions by 1 billion ton from now onwards till 2030. The promise number 4 was that by 2030, India will reduce the carbon intensity of its economy by less than 45%. And finally, by the year 2070, India will achieve the target of net zero emission. And this was most debatable topic of the Glasgow summit. Now, of the 5-point target announced by Prime Minister, achieving net zero emission status by 2070 is one with least clarity as of now. This is because this promise seems to have been made primarily to satisfy the international demand. At the same time, 2070 is a long way away, 50 years from now, and there is plenty of time to plan a roadmap to achieve that target. But other 4 targets have been promised to be achieved in a very, very short span of time, for example, 2030, which is just 10 years from now. So out of all these, 2 about reducing emission intensity and increasing the renewable mix in electricity generation are already part of India's official climate action plan called Nationally Determined Contributions that has been submitted as a part of requirement under the Paris Climate Agreement. So if you look into that, there is nothing new about these two promises which have been made. In that NDC submitted in 2015, India had promised to reduce its emission intensity or emissions per unit of GDP by 33% to 35% from 2005 level by the year 2020. India had also said that it would ensure that at least 40% of its installed capacity of electricity generation by 2030 would come through non-fossil fuel based resources. And that 40% now has been increased to 50%. So both these targets have been enhanced by Modi. The emission intensity reduction target has been raised to 45% and the share of renewable has been increased to 50%, as you can clearly see over here. Now there is some confusion about the renewables target because of the words used by Prime Minister Modi. Because Prime Minister stated that India intended to fulfill 50% of its energy requirement through renewables by 2030. And this came as a surprise since electricity is just one part of the larger energy basket. And all previous commitments were formulated for electricity generation and not energy. So you need to understand that there is clear-cut difference between energy and electricity. Electricity is just one component of overall energy. But here I would like to highlight one thing, that the third promise made in India's nationally determined contributions about increase in forest cover did not find a mention in Modi's speech in Glasgow. Incidentally, the third promise made in India's NDC about increase in forest cover did not find a mention in Modi's speech in Glasgow. And that is the only target that India is struggling to achieve. Because in the NDC, India has promised to create an additional carbon sink of 2.5 billion to 3 billion tons of carbon dioxide equivalent through forest and tree cover by year 2030. Although India's forest cover has been growing, according to official data, the pace of growth as of now is far from being what is required to achieve the target. So all in all, you can say that whatever India has promised, India is on track to achieve that. There are few things which have been brought fresh on the table. For example, the absolute reduction in carbon emissions and net zero emission, but more or less the fundamentals or ideology behind them is still the same. Let us now move on to the next news. LZTFL1 gene is the topic of next discussion because a very important explained column appeared in the Indian Express. Study links South Asian descent gene to higher COVID risk. Here are the key findings. And the name of the gene is this one. Now, from the perspective of prelims examination, obscure terms like these are very, very important. For example, we have a latest instance of 2021 prelims examination where UPSC asked the term ACE2 is talked about in the context of, and of course all of us know, spread of viral diseases. Of course, ACE2 was much talked about because it is the receptor which directly gets connected to the spike protein of coronavirus. But nonetheless, this also may turn out to be that famous because this gene, repeat it again, LZTFL1, can be found in 60% of the people with South Asian ancestry, and the researchers say that it may be able to explain the excess deaths seen in some of the UK communities and the impact of pandemic during the second wave in India. Now this research may be as good as it can be, but we also have to account various other factors. For example, when there is a mortality due to a disease, for example, COVID, it's always, and in most of the cases, just cannot be attributed to a single cause. For example, in this case, a gene. There are a lot of factors which are responsible behind death of a patient. For example, we know the existence of comorbidities, the overall socioeconomic condition of the community which we are talking about. And so the data from the research could be true about gene, but it does not give us full insight about why there was a higher percentage of people dying in a particular community in UK because of LZTFL1. But as far as the gene is concerned, it is related to a human DNA. So now we will take up two very important news which were published in last Sunday's The Hindu newspaper. The first one being scientists find a mineral seen in the depths of the earth in a meteorite. So what basically means is that a meteorite which was found in Kharagpur, India, contains similar constitution and similar mineral which is found at the depths of the earth. And so now we are going to understand how is that possible, starting with the mineral first. And the name of the mineral is Bridgmanite, which is most volumetrically abundant mineral of the Earth's interior and not on the surface of the Earth, because it needs that high pressure and temperature in order for it to form. It is present in the lower mantle, which is about depths of more than 660 kilometers going up to 2700 kilometers. And it is important to understand its formation mechanism to better comprehend the origin and evolution of the planetary interiors. Bridgmanite consists of magnesium, iron, calcium, aluminum oxide and has perovskite structure, which is of no use for us. So we have seen that this mineral has been reported in a meteorite, but this is not the first time. A lot of Bridgmanite-like minerals have been reported from a meteorite, but their chemical composition does not fully match with terrestrial Bridgmanite present in the Earth's interior. But this is the first time that the chemical composition is also matching a lot, and so it gives credence to moon-forming giant impact hypothesis, which says that long ago, around 4.5 billion years ago, the Earth collided with a planet of the size of the Mars named as Thela, and the force of this impact was so huge as to melt the Earth down from the surface to a depth of around 750 kilometers. The theory says that this caused the Earth to be bathed in magma ocean, and the ejecta from the collision led to the formation of the Moon. This is the most favored hypothesis on the formation of the Moon, and the present finding of meteorite lends further support to it, because if you have a meteorite which contains a mineral which is found deep inside Earth's mantle, how that can be possible? That can be possible only when a planetary body strikes Earth, leads to the melting of the Earth, leads to the ejection of the Moon, and in the process a lot of meteorites are also created. So this is the importance of this finding. Let us now move on to the next news, a movement to root out invasive alien species. And so the topic of discussion is invasive alien species, which is very, very important from the perspective of prelims examination. So IAS, or invasive alien species, is a species introduced by humans either intentionally or accidentally outside of its natural past or present distribution. However, not all alien species have negative impacts, and it is estimated that between 5 to 20% of all alien species become problematic. It is these species that are termed as invasive alien species. They are just not limited to flora but also extend to fauna. Some of the most common alien species are Prosopis julifera, water hyacinth, snowflake corals, Lantana camara, African apple snail, papaya mealybug, Amazon sailfin catfish. So it is important for you to remember these names because in 2021, UPSC asked a question in which one of the option was given as Congress grass, which is nothing but your Parthenium, which is also an alien species. So what is the impact of these alien species and why are we so troubled or worried about them? We are worried about them because they are a new component which are introduced in the ecosystem, and so they alter the overall balance. They change the competition, grazing pattern, predation, parasitism, hybridization, biofouling, poisoning, flammability, disease transmission, and interaction with other alien species. And so when you look into the impact, it modifies the hydrology, native species decline, leads to soil erosion, primary production alteration. If we talk about socio-economic impact, agricultural damage, reduced access to water, infrastructure damage, human health, damage to forestry, and reduction in tourism. If you look into the image which is on your screen, you see that the overall lake, almost majority of it has been covered by water hyacinth, which is an alien species. And this is just one of the examples to show how an ecosystem is altered by the introduction of alien species. So if you keep into your mobile phone the screenshot, you will be able to remember the impact of alien species.